Hello again everybody, welcome back to Decode Tech. The last video in this series we talked about how to organize files, and in this video we're going to break down everything you need to know about what a file is and how to manage files. So what is a file actually? Well, it's a collection of bytes, and if you don't know what bytes are, I have a series on how computers work. I recommend you go check that out if you're interested in that type of thing, but if not, you can just keep watching and I think you'll be able to get it either way. So these bytes aren't really useful to humans, so humans came up with an abstraction called a file. It's much easier to work with files than with just a bunch of bytes. Now files can come in many different types. For example, you have picture files, you have video files, text, and programs or applications, which are called executable files. And since bytes are just a bunch of ones and zeros, and a 1 and a 0 is a 1 and a 0 no matter which way you slice it, the computer relies on specific patterns of these bytes to know how to interpret it. Because if the program isn't sure how to interpret it, you might get something you weren't expecting at all. And I'll demonstrate that a little bit later on. Alright, so let's get right into it. So here I am in the File Explorer, and I have a folder with some files in it. Now there's 4 important parts of a file for a user. Number 1 is its path, which is just the location of the file on the hard drive, and that is up here in the address bar. And if you want to know more about the path, that's another reason to go check out my last video in this series. The second thing is the file's name. So here we have a file called report. Underneath it is a file called shapes. And then right after the name comes something called a file extension. And this is how we can know what type of file something is. Now by default on a lot of modern operating systems, they hide the file extension because they want a computer to be as intuitive as possible. But in some ways, I feel like this hinders us because it's a little bit harder to differentiate always what type a file is. So if you want to see this in Windows, you can go under the View tab here and click on File Name Extensions. And that'll show you a dot with a couple letters of the file name extension. For example, our report file has the file extension .txt. That stands for a text file. Right beneath it, that file has a different file extension. So these are 2 different types of files. And the fourth thing you want to realize about your files is their size. So actually here we have some columns, and over here we have a size column, and you see this one is 0 KB, this one is 44 KB. The KB stands for kilobyte. So those bytes I talked about earlier, well, a kilobyte is 1,000 bytes. So there's different measurements of a size of a file to make it easier for humans to read, just like you have inches, feet, and a yard. You have gigabytes and kilobytes that fit inside a megabyte. And so it's important to know how big your file is, so if your hard drive gets too full, you can analyze which files you need to keep or which files you should move, that way to free up space on your hard drive. So some of the most common file extensions you might want to know are .exe, which stands for an executable file, .txt, which we talked about stands for text file, .pdf, which I believe stands for portable document format, which often like job applications are PDFs or like parts manuals that you find online are all PDFs. Now when it comes to like picture and music file extensions, there's many popular ones for each of those file types. So like .jpeg is a popular picture format, .png is another picture format, .mp3 is a music format, .mp4, and many others. And if you ever don't know what a file format is, just Google it. Just type into Google, what is a .txt file? And you'll find lots of information on it. All right, so how do you create a file? Well, you can either right-click on the desktop, or you can right-click in the directory you want to create a file in. And in both cases, you'll get a menu like this. And then you just go under New, and then it gives you the different types of files you can create. Now, yours may differ from mine, since I have different programs installed on my computer that allow me to create different kinds of documents. But you should always be able to at least create a text document. So if you just click on text document, and then it'll ask you to type the name of your document, just say something like new document, and hit enter. Now that file is created. The other way you can create a file is to go under a program that allows you to create files, like Notepad's a very simple example. You can type in some basic text, and then just click on File, Save As, and then go under the directory you want to save it in. So here I have my document that I just created, but you see down here, it already assumes I'm creating a text document since Notepad is an application that edits and creates text files. And down here, I can select different text formats I want. Now, Notepad is pretty limited, so it just gives me the text format. So in front of the txt, I'm just going to create a new file name, another document, and hit enter or hit save. Now if I exit out of this, you'll see I get another document saved in that folder. Now that you created some documents, maybe you want to edit them or convert them into another type. So to open a program, you either just double click it and it'll open with its default editor, or you can right click on it and go under open with and choose what program you want to open it up with. Another way to edit a file is to go back into a program that allows you to edit files and go under open and select the file you want to edit, hit open, and it'll bring it in and you can make your changes at the end. So make some changes and then you can save it again. Now that you already told it where to save, you can just click save and get out of it. If you want to rename your file, you can simply click on it, then right click and go under rename. And I'm just gonna change my name a little bit here. I recommend naming your documents that have several words in them to separate them by underscores instead of spaces. It's just nicer for computers to deal with. I'm gonna hit enter and that'll save my changed name. And you could also change the name through an application like Notepad by going save as and changing the name you save it as. Now if you want to convert a file, you might just think, well, I could just rename the file extension by going under rename and changing the extension after the dot. That'll be okay with some files. If you want to edit some text files, for example, in a different kind of text editor, you could change the text extension as long as it's another text file extension. The program might still open it, but it might not open it in the same formatting you were expecting or that you were hoping for. So it doesn't necessarily convert it to a different file type. For that, you'll either need to go online and get a file converter on there. You can do them straight on the web sometimes, or you might have to download a file converting program. But sometimes it is okay to just change the extension, depends on what you're doing. If you try to open a file in an application that can't understand that type of file, you might get some really gibberish looking thing. For example, I'm going to open up Notepad, and I'm going to go under File, Open, and I'm going to find a .exe file, which is an application. So I'm going to go under Downloads, and you see it doesn't show any items in here, but that's because it automatically looks for .txt documents. If I instead look for all files, it'll show me some exe files here. So if I click on this exe and I hit open, you'll see I get all this gibberish pop in because Notepad does not know how to interpret an exe file. So that's why it's important to have the right file extensions. Alright, so now what if you want to move a file? Well, I actually already covered moving files in my last video, so yet another reason to go watch my video on how to organize computer files, so I'm not going to touch that in this one here. And that brings us into our last category, deleting a file. So if you want to delete a file, it's pretty straightforward. You just select your file, right click, and go down to the delete and click delete. Optionally, you can click on it and just hit the back key on your keyboard and it will erase it. You also can just overwrite a file. If you want to make a new file with the same name in the same folder or directory, that'll overwrite the old one and put the new one in its place. For example, I have speech.txt here. So if I open up Notepad and say, this is a new file, and I save it as that speech file, let me go under that folder and go under the speech file and hit save. It'll say this already exists, do you want to replace it? So in a sense, it deletes the old one and puts the new one there if you hit yes. Now if you open it back up, it has the new file contents in its place. Now, just a word of warning, you do want to be careful on what you delete. If you don't know what it is, maybe do a Google search on it before you just delete it, because there are some system files on your computer that if you delete them, it could mess up your system. And actually, one last thing before we go, say you deleted something by accident, you have a recycle bin up in the left-hand corner of your desktop, and that is where your deleted files will go. Now, you don't just want to go delete stuff and be like, oh, it'll be in the recycle bin, because if the recycle bin gets emptied, it's gone. There are ways to recover stuff, but it generally requires sending your hard drive to somebody that knows how to do it, and it can cost a good bit of money, so be careful what you delete. I think the recycle bin empties itself after a period of time. If not, I know it does empty itself after it gets so full. It'll just start deleting old files if it gets too full. If you'd like to manually empty it yourself, just to clear all that data off your hard drive, you can right-click on your recycle bin and click Empty Recycle Bin, and it'll be gone. Alright, so that's pretty much everything you need to know about working with files in Windows. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. If you found the video useful, there's two ways you can help out. You can leave a thumbs up, or I have a Patreon account that you can donate some money to help me out if you have the means. And I hope to see you all in the next Windows tutorial.